Okay, so today's podcast is going to be a little different. I'm actually going to be the one who's interviewed. And this mainly came about due to a conversation that I had 3 or 4 weeks ago. Essentially, I realised that people are honest, people are transparent, people are open on this podcast. And I don't think I've done enough to really prove the same. And I firmly believe that in order to ask for something, you need to first show it. So today is going to be a little insight into me, my motivations, my history, and ultimately how I've got to this point today. The person interviewing me is the same person I had this conversation with 3 or 4 weeks ago. Her name is Alice. She's one of my oldest friends, and we thought it would be fun to try this out, see how it goes. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the episode, and we'll see where this one takes us. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
Okay.
First question number 1. I'm curious to know, and I'm sure others would be curious to know, what made you create this podcast? What inspired it? Like, where did it come from?
Yeah, there's a few different things for me where I feel like it was almost like a perfect storm in terms of I was actually going through a really hard time, if I'm honest. So had a few ups and downs generally, but a few things happened in my life where I guess it made me be more self-reflective and much more than usual. And I was really trying to think, okay, like what do I actually want to do, A, with my life, and B, what do I want to achieve over the next 5 years, but also what do I enjoy doing as a human being? And I've always felt that I've perhaps been a little bit different in that regard, because what I enjoy doing the most is speaking to people like this. It's like one-on-one, deep conversations. I can't say I'm the life and soul of every fucking party, but you know, like
Can
that's...
we swear on here?
Yeah, absolutely
Okay,
fine.
good to know. Sorry.
No, that's fine. But that's just me. That's just what I enjoy doing, and I think that was actually an internal battle for a while, personally. But I was like, what can I do where that is kind of incorporated into something that, yeah, like gives me value, that isn't just speaking to someone at a party, that actually hopefully will have benefit for other people? Because that's another part, is that, you know, I know what I want to do in the future needs to serve people, needs to have some sort of purpose beyond just serving, you know, the man or a larger company, etc. And I know that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't work for a company, but if I can do something like this at the same time, I think it just, yeah, gives me massive value. So that was sort of a realization I had. Gosh, this was back in February, I think, of this year. And yeah, that was actually born out of relative negativity for me, which was interesting. And I guess secondly, I've listened to podcasts for the last 3 or 4 years. For me, they have changed the way I look at myself and that I see the world. You know, some of the learnings I've got from people like Simon Sinek, who's a psychologist, and you know, even like the old episodes on Joe Rogan from way back in the day. I know people aren't sometimes the biggest fan of his, but
That's controversial.
yeah, I understand. But I'm sure everyone has a story where they've listened to a podcast and it's just changed the way they see the world. And for me, success is more of a measure of if that can happen even once to someone else. I don't need to know about it, but that's kind of my aim, is to have a conversation with someone that asks people to look within themselves. And like that is something that I feel is really important. So yeah, those two things combined made that perfect storm, and here we are.
Cool. And so asking people to look into themselves, that's something that you'd say you're good at doing?
Yeah, I think it's something I've always done.
Yeah.
As you can testament to.
I can, yeah, testament to that.
It's just what is most natural to me. Like the common denominator for the last 15 years of my life has been the question of why. And I always want to know why. And if someone tells me something or they open up about a situation, I almost feel like it's my duty now to say why and delve deeper, ask some questions. And yeah, it's something that it's not really a switch that I can turn off. it's really strange. And I think that's grown even stronger since having therapy myself as well. Because, I used to think I was the most self-aware person in the world, and, I had it all figured out. And God, does the universe just nudge you and say, no, you fucking don't. And I had that realization pretty strongly
Okay.
recently. So yeah, always something that I've had for sure.
Yes, I can vouch for that. It is something that you've always had. So I think you've talked about, and just in passing, you've literally just mentioned that, you've had some serious time to reflect and the past 15 years. So I think it would be good to kind of take us back to, where it all began. And for you to kind of talk about, I think, it's really important. And I've seen in your other interviews, childhood and growing up, obviously it defines who we are. So tell me a little bit about that. Well, tell me a lot about that. Tell me about your childhood. How was it? What did it look like? Fond memories, not so fond memories. Yeah,
absolutely. So I grew up in France, and I don't really have many memories, if I'm honest, from that time, but I was very happy. I always remember being told I was a very outgoing, sort of like bright kid who liked playing outdoors, and we'd go like to the mountains on the weekend and stuff, mountain biking or like snowboarding in the winter, etc. And yeah, that's what I've been told, and that is what I remember somewhat. I don't remember any like real negativity towards the early side of my life. And yeah, as far as I knew, I was a pretty happy child. I then moved to England when I was 12 because my dad, sort of his business moved over to the UK, and that was really tough because I think it's hard for anyone moving country, don't get me wrong, but I was always a bit of a homeboy. I liked my home comforts, and I guess just like wasn't great in new environments. That's something that I've remembered as early as I can possibly remember.
And at 12, that's a typical age. You're becoming a teenager. You're transitioning from a child to a teenager. And then to kind of root up your life and move to a different country is a lot.
Yeah, 100%. And I think my parents knew that as well, and they did everything they could to try and make it as comfortable as possible. But I remember that first day walking into school, and I'd had butterflies in my stomach for like 2 months before that day because I didn't know what the school was like. I didn't know anyone there. I just felt negatively about it. I couldn't see a positive. And I remember for the first like month and a half, I used to like want to go home every lunchtime. I just wanted to push everything away. And then I don't know what happened. I think I just started to open up a little bit more. I started to meet, a few of the boys. We started to play football and stuff like that. And then the minute that I met a few friends and I felt comfortable, it was just like game changing. I felt completely at home. All of my friends live within like a mile radius of me, so it would be going out, on your bike, knocking on their door, can you come out and play, etc. And I had really positive memories from that point as well. So it ended up being quite comfortable for me, and I really found my feet, which was lovely.
Yeah, it sounds like you were quite fortunate to meet such good friends.
Yeah, definitely. I think
You're still friends with some of them today, right?
Yeah, I live with one of them.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. But it was. I felt very fortunate with friends. I know everyone has a really different path, and some people find it difficult, etc. But back in Farnham, everyone lives very close together, and that definitely helps with regards to the dynamic. But yeah, moved from France, settled in well for the first 2 years, and then I had a period of my life that I actually had buried up until about 6 months ago. And that was when I was diagnosed with ME. And for people that don't know what ME is, it's essentially a condition where after a serious illness, which was pneumonia in my case, you never quite recover. So the symptoms are wake up in the morning feeling, so tired that you literally can't get out of bed. I remember I was going for walks with my mum. It would get 5 minutes into the walk and I'd literally feel like I'm going to collapse and I needed to go back to the car. And it was all very unknown and no one really knew why or what actually happened. It couldn't be explained from a physiological point of view either. So there were no markers of, I'm going to do this test and you have ME. It was all just symptoms based.
And there's no treatment for it, is there?
No. And to go through that when you're like 13, 14. So this was year 6, year 7.
Yeah.
You're moving schools as well.
Yeah, tough transition.
Yeah. It was really hard. And particularly when I had doctors telling me, you're fine, you're faking it. And I think for me personally, there was some truth in that because I was a bit of a cry wolf back in the day. And my parents knew it.
Weren't we all?
Well, yeah, exactly right. Like, if you didn't fancy school in the afternoon, sometimes you're like, I'm feeling really ill. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did it so many times.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
We're all kids then, right?
Exactly. We're young and,
Yeah, exactly. And so I'd gained a bit of a reputation maybe. So it took a while for my parents to believe me. And I always remember this story where my dad knew I loved McDonald's and part of ME was I didn't want to eat either. I'd literally be having like 2 pieces of toast a day and that was all I could have. And my dad drove to McDonald's when they were really trying to test me because I'd been off school for 2 or 3 weeks at that point. And he got like chicken nuggets and he was literally like, Chris, are you sure you don't want a chicken nugget? And I was like, no. He was like, are you sure? And like really pressed me for it.
Eat the chicken nugget.
And I was like, no. And he'd like put it close to my face and I was like, no.
Yeah.
But then like as stupid as it sounds, like that was a moment when the penny dropped for both of them, I think, when it was like, like usually he could not resist that.
Yeah.
And now he can't even eat a chicken nugget. So yeah, just something that I'm reminded by. But I had that for a year and a half. And that was me not being in school for like 6 months in year 6. I think in year 7 I very gradually went back. Sometimes it was like coming in the mornings, leaving in the afternoon. I think that happened for maybe another 6 months.
And that's really hard because obviously in year 7 you've started a new school. Well, in the UK you start a new school in year 7. So again you're trying to integrate with all the kids but you're in not full time, and so when all those friendships are forming, you're kind of absent. Did you feel like that impacted that initial kind of friendship forming stage when you joined secondary school?
Yeah. I actually wonder whether it's impacted even to this day. Because I'm very fortunate to still know a lot of the people that I know today, but you can't help but look at someone that you've known for 15 years and kind of see their 14, 15-year-old self. And I wonder whether that's actually ever left people, even if it's subconscious. And yeah, definitely at the time it was really hard. People didn't understand why I left school at lunchtime. No one understood what it meant to be like, severely ill at that point. So they just thought, you're so lucky you're getting an afternoon off. Or all afternoons off, or you don't have to do this, or you can leave the class when you want. And I like, well, like I can't help it kind of thing. Like that's just what I can manage at the moment. But it was really interesting because I often think about what was the psychological aspect of that, of getting over ME, and what was the physical aspect. And what I mean by that is nothing changed. I just gradually got better. But I noticed as soon as I kind of came to terms with the fact that I do not want to live my life like this, I like mentally was able to really push myself and be like, no, I'm going to go into school. Like, even if it's for an hour, I'm going to do this. Even if it exhausts me, even if I can't do anything for the rest of the day, I want to go and see a friend for 20 minutes. And it was only once I reached that point that I started to get better. So it was almost like, can you psych yourself into feeling better at that point. And that was the only thing that started to sort of bend that trajectory back up.
Interesting. So I guess you used the kind of mind over matter in that case. And obviously for a lot of illnesses, that doesn't work. You know, you have a physical illness and, you know, you can be really strong and mentally strong, but, you know, you're not overcoming that illness. Whereas I feel like ME is, like you said, it's physiological, but it's also quite psychological. But to have that kind of realization and strength at how old were you? What, 13?
Yeah,
12,
13,
13? To go, I'm not living my life like this anymore, you know, is really quite something.
Well, I almost had to see what I was missing out on to give me a reward to try and get back there. Because, you know, all I could feel was being exhausted. That was all I ever felt. And, you know, I just remember, there was like a year where I barely ate all day and struggled to do anything. But I'm not saying that that even was the case, that I like mentally said, oh, this is enough. It's more that I think, like when you go to the gym and you build muscles, right? Like you go to the gym for, you know, an hour a week first, and then you go 2 hours, 3 hours, then it's 5 days. I think that's what I had to do. I almost had to build my like health back. And that was the only thing that got me over it. And then by, I think it was like early year 8, I was absolutely fine. You know, I like subtly wonder today whether it ever has an impact, whether it's ever like still there, just in the, you know, not psychologically, because it probably is, but physically, because I do tend to feel a bit like, oh God. But to be honest, it's probably more the drinking and going out and late nights and lack of sleep. So,
yeah,
you know.
That's interesting. And it seems to be a condition that has very little research around. Well, I'm sure there is. I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but from what you've told me, and I do know other people that suffer from it, it seems to be kind of like you know, the medical world shrugs their shoulders at it.
Yeah.
So maybe one day you will find out more about it, and does it impact you long term? But yeah, obviously the drinking and the going out is probably the number one reason why you're tired.
Yeah, unfortunately the finger always points back at you in that in that regard.
Exactly.
But yeah, you know, as I said at the beginning, I'd completely forgotten about it until I went into therapy and I had to explain what went on. And then I also asked my family, I said, like, what happened? Because I can't remember it. It was obviously, you know, buried. And they explained it a bit more, and that helped me understand how I actually felt at that time. But yeah, you know, it's like, it's amazing that something so big in a period of your life that's, you know, I guess that, has such a long duration, you can literally feel like was a snap of the fingers.
Yeah.
And I don't think I gave it any credit for how I've been built today, which is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think from speaking now, a lot of things that come up, well, like a recurring theme that comes up in what you're talking about is memory. You know, when you spoke about, oh, you know, I lived in France, but I don't remember much of it. And with my ME, I only remembered it when I went in therapy. It seems like, and you said I buried it, obviously, but, you know, I'm intrigued by that, because that's, you know, not like, why do you forget things? Why do you think you forget things?
Yeah, so I might butcher this explanation scientifically, but I'm pretty sure it's true. Apparently what happens, especially when you're a child, is if you're stressed, like the stress hormone is cortisol, and if cortisol's high, it like hijacks your long-term memory processing. So the theory is that if someone says, I don't remember a lot of my childhood, it means that you're actually quite stressed. And now we're all stressed, right? You know, some people have horrendous childhoods where it's a constant fight or flight, etc. I'm not saying that was me, but I have had like some fairly pivotal points in my life. And I think a lot
hardship,
of that, yeah,
in a way,
having
like that, ME,
that was hard. Moving country was hard. You know, it's weird that I don't really remember my time in France too much, but yeah, I don't really know what the stresses are then. I haven't gone quite that far back in therapy. Probably need hypnotherapy for that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting, and I think it's just something to be conscious of, because I had no idea that was a possible reason. But it was, yeah, something that my own therapist told me.
Yeah. And do you think therapy really helps like bring out those suppressed memories?
Yeah.
Because someone, might be listening to this and feel there's like a whole gap in their life where they don't really recall or remember. And would you say that therapy's really helped you?
Definitely. And therapy helped me because it, I often say it like puts a mirror up in front of you. But what then helped me was uncovering, okay, I've got this gap in my life. And then I went to the people that were there at that time, like my mum, my dad. And I was like, what happened from your perspective? And then I got someone else's perspective from it. Because I don't know about you, but I never go to my family and say, oh, like when I was 8 years old and this happened, like, how did you feel? Or what was I like? Or how did I respond? You kind of just take your life for granted, and you take it for what you experience it as. Whereas when you're 25, you're often like, oh, what do you think of me? So you're much more conscious of it. But when you're a child, you kind of just roll through.
You seek feedback as an adult a lot more as a kid, because obviously your self-awareness isn't developed as it is today.
Yeah, exactly. And that really helps as well. Like going to my mum, we sat in the car, we were on a long car journey, and I just said, I've just had this situation happen to me where I've remembered that I was ill for 2 years of my life. What happened? What was I like? And she told me the chicken nugget story, which made me laugh. And we were actually like bonded over it, which was really lovely. And I also got to hear about how hard it was for them, like the fact that they didn't know whether they could believe me or not, or that no doctor was giving an answer. And, the process of, I guess, recovering from that, from their point of view. And my mum actually said, like, there was a point where they were like, we don't know whether you're ever going to get better. They're like, this could be it for the rest of your life, because
That's
no one
scary
knew.
for a parent.
For some people it is. For some people who have ME, they never recover. And that's the issue about something that's so unknown. So I, definitely recommend, if you're in a place where you feel comfortable enough to do so and you trust the people that you ask, go back into your life, in a time where you don't know, and try and get a bit more context,
Interesting. Okay, so you're in secondary school now, and amazingly, you start feeling better, and so you start being kind of like a normal kid. How was that? How was secondary school?
The challenge didn't really stop. I always felt like I was catching up, both in a social sense and in a confidence sense. So not being at school means that you miss, every joke, every funny thing that happens. And obviously I didn't really know this at the time, but all I wanted to do was then like just jump back into life and feel normal. And I had so much energy because I felt normal again. I felt like I was back on my right path. And it took a long time for me to properly integrate back into school. And I think also for my friends to trust me again, because as far as they're aware, I was faking the whole thing. Or, no one understood. I didn't expect them to understand. But I still had my friends at school, but it took a long time for me to, I guess, feel comfortable with the people that I was with and exposed to.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you and I were very close for a period of time during school. I mean, we always stayed close, but I think there was kind of year 8, probably. Year 8.
Yeah, you're right.
Was when we were most close. And I feel as though you were so desperately trying to fit in. And it really, like we all are. But I think because obviously you had this ME that had really impacted your journey, your transition into school, and but you are always have been different in the way that you're very in tune with other people's feelings. And I think you had those skills and that how would you say it,
like emotional intelligence.
Yeah. And intuition there, but you knew that being sensitive 14-year-old boy, especially with, you know, your group of friends who were complete jokers,
it's a mismatch.
in the best way, but there was, you could sense, and being close to you, I could sense that you felt that there was that disconnect, but you just wanted to override that a lot. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think I was battling within myself because I didn't know which one I was.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether I was the person that could sit down with someone for 2 hours and talk about feelings and how they felt and why, and shoot the shit.
Yeah.
Or whether I was the person who wanted to be carefree, do stupid stuff. Like, I don't know. I feel like even to this day, I'm a bit of both. I need a bit of both in my life because I need conversations like this and I need to open up because it gives me a certain sense of value. But I also need to have like play in my life and have fun and ride my bike with my hair flowing in the wind.
Get shit-faced with your mates.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I think I've now come to that point where I know that's what I need. I need to have both so that I can be happy. But at that time, I had to hide either one in either situation because, and I had to like adapt and mold and fit to my environment. And I think that's a real issue because if you're having to do that, people can also sense that you're not being real. And even though it was part of me, I think it didn't come across like it was real, particularly with my friends more than anything, because I often describe, and I spoke to someone about this the other day, if you're not projecting your real self, I think it builds a brick wall between communication. So you want to be able to look someone in the face and kind of like see below them and say, okay, I know what you're saying is real. And even that, if that realness is, you know, someone being vulgar or someone saying something horrendous, but they mean it, it's like, okay, well, at least they're being real with you. At least they are being themselves. And I can take that. And then you have a choice of taking it or leaving it. But the problem is when you're putting up a false front or you're trying to hide something or the messaging's convoluted, even 50-year-old kids can figure that out.
Oh, I mean, more so.
Yeah.
I think kids have a real intuition. And, you know, there's always that saying, children police themselves. And so if you're, you know, and that isn't necessarily like a positive or a negative. It just means that if you're not conforming to the typical behavior of that group or that group of children, then they're gonna ice you out in a way.
Yeah, 100%. You can't. The thing is, I can't blame anyone for it because in school and in college, it's basically survival.
Yeah,
it really is. Like, you know, we've all had our.
It was a good time.
Yeah, but you know, like,
it's hard. It's really hard. Yeah. It is really hard.
I can't. How can you blame someone for, you know, following the pack or doing something else? And maybe I'm justifying my own behavior a bit here, but when you don't know who you are, when you're still growing, and there's all sorts of stuff happening hormonally within you, and you know, it feels like there's a new joke or a new thing every day, and you know, obviously, I think we can all look back at periods in our childhood or things that we've done where we're like, I'm not proud of that, but the fact that you can now look back on it and say, okay, I wasn't proud of it, means that you've developed somewhat and that you've come somewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's important not to be so hard on yourself of what you were like as a teenager. I think your brain isn't fully developed. I mean, our brains also have only just fully developed. I mean, they stopped developing.
I don't have any more left.
Yeah. Please, this needs to develop more. But yeah, I mean, I also went through a similar thing of really just trying to forgive myself about some of the horrendous things I did as a, 14, 15-year-old girl, which honestly is the antichrist. 14, 15-year-old girls can be the devil incarnate, and boys as well, for their own reasons. Like you said, there's so many hormones flying around. You have like a split personality sometimes, but yeah, you can't even feel like shame, because you're not even you at that point. You're building you, and you've got to make those mistakes, and you've got to do the weird shit and ashamed shit that you've done.
To figure it all out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to.
I mean, we've done our fair share.
Yeah.
Everyone has. But yeah, I think that's really important. What you're trying to say is that, that it's a learning process, and you can't be too hard on yourself about what you were like as a kid.
Yeah, I have a few like life philosophies that I'm sure.
Do share.
Yeah. I don't really know how they've been formed, but I just like believe really strongly in them. Probably puts myself in a little box, so I need to try and get out of that. But one of those things is that, particularly when you're young, that you need to understand boundaries. So your track is like this, and you need to understand where one boundary is and where another is. And the only way by doing that is to push on the boundaries and go towards them and say, okay, like I've pushed towards this one, how do I feel? Okay, I know I need to come back a little bit. And then you eventually, I feel like as a kid, you start with your boundaries super wide. And then if you go to here...
yeah, like kids are like biting each other, pulling each other's hair,
They're doing whatever they want,
goes.
Right?
Within reason.
But yeah, you have to hit your boundary in order to understand what it means to do that. And therefore you can learn from that and then be like, okay, cool, I don't want to go that far anymore. And when you're young, life is all about trying to, hit those boundaries arguably as frequently as possible, so you can then understand where you want to go, where your limits are, what you enjoy doing, what you don't. Because if you go your whole life going straight down that middle track, you're never going to understand what it's like to be in either extreme. And I think that's more dangerous, because you never...
Sounds pretty boring.
Yeah, it's boring, but it's also like, I feel like that's when true chaos happens, when someone has never like gone to an extreme or never understood what it's like to push either side, and you don't know what...
So it's almost amoral that you haven't, flexed your moral sides. You haven't done something that makes you feel shame. So you don't know what shame feels like. That's like. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, you can't, it's like not opening Pandora's box.
Yeah.
It's like you have no idea what's inside until you open it.
That's such a good analogy for being a teenager, is the opening of Pandora's box. Because it's so true.
Yeah. Better open it when you're 15 versus 35, because...
Absolutely.
There are...
Sound advice.
So, like, well done.
Yeah.
We did well.
Remembers one thing from this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, there's clearly a running theme here, is that secondary school was a struggle, with Emmy, but also around fitting in and almost always playing catch up. So moving on, college. So I think, college, obviously, how old are you when you go to college? 16?
16, yeah. Yeah, so I'd say as I got older, I started to understand myself a little bit more, as we all do. We all go through those ways, right? I remember leaving like year 11 and being like, like you've done your GCSEs, it's all exciting, you have a fun summer, etc. Everyone's growing up.
Yeah, that summer was great.
Yeah, it's always after doing your exams, and leaving school. It's always the best summers for some reason. I don't know why.
Reading Festival 2013.
Oh, don't remind me of that. Pandora's box. I'm shutting that one. So yeah, if you haven't done that, it's a coming of age moment. It's good fun.
Oh yeah. Ooh. Yeah, rite of passage.
Yeah. And then college was To be honest, more of the same. Like, friendship wise, it was just still a lot of ego, a lot of bravado from myself and everyone else, you know. Um, I, I feel like there's not a whole load more of the story there in terms of friendships. I guess the one big thing that did happen was I sort of got into my first long-term relationship, and that sort of gave me a whole new level of, you know, happiness, appreciation, confidence, like all of the positive sort of
All the good
words I can
vibes.
possibly use. Yeah. Because, you know, like I was quite an overweight kid at some
Okay.
points. I went from, you know, having ME and being like rake thin to then suddenly being able to eat, but just obviously pushing it too far. So pushed my boundary that way for sure. And you know, I was like, I think I got to like year 11 or something like that, and then I was like, okay, I'm actually a little bit fat, so I need to, you know, watch what I eat a little bit more and just, you know, not binge eat basically. So I started to like slim down a little bit, you know, as it came to college, and continued to do so afterwards. Um, and yeah, so therefore I'd say my confidence at school wasn't high at all. And, you know, then I never really had the feeling or knew the feeling of meeting someone and them really liking me and stuff like that. So um, that was obviously a little bit of a hole at that point. And then, yeah, I met someone in first year of college, and yeah, it was crazy. Like, you know, it gave me something I'd never felt before. And that was really special. It gave me a whole new level of confidence, which I then was able to apply in, you know, the rest of my life, to be honest, in terms of friendships or going to, you know, do like going to work. Like I worked in a pub for 3 years, which was definitely an
Which
interesting.
pub?
It was a Cherry Tree in
Oh,
Farnham.
really?
Well, I worked there for 3 years, and my word, did I learn a lot about life
Didn't know
there.
that. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Always working in a pub.
yeah, it was great.
Some life lessons.
Highly recommend anyone to work in a pub. I got to see the best and the worst in adults, you know, what drinking culture was like, and our bosses were very interesting people, but they,
It's not even a pub anymore, is it?
no, it's a
No.
house. It's so sad. But yeah, I'll just quickly say both of our bosses, they're called Dom and Rich. They were both from London, like sort of like mid-30s. And, you know, my family were always very like caring and empathetic and like quite soft in that way. My dad had, you know, like was somewhat stern in some ways, but, you know, I feel like we did have quite a good balance, but it definitely was on the more empathetic side. I then go and meet Dom and Rich, you know, going to work, and they'd be the type of people who'd be like, why are you doing that? Sort it out. And I'm like, no one's ever spoken to me like this. Like what the hell? But my God, did I need it? I
Yeah.
needed some of that like super directness, because at first I was like, oh God, I felt like I was going to cry. But then, you know, 6 months later, and I'm giving it back to them, and it really gave me a bit of an edge.
Bit of
So yeah,
confidence.
100%. I
Yeah.
was washing dishes, you know, like I was washing dishes. I was, you know, I had like stuff all down my t-shirt, and then he'd be like, go and serve someone. I'm like, I can't serve someone like this. He was like, just go and do it. And like, there wasn't a choice in the matter, you know. But then I was like talking to adults. You were kind of like, you know, giving them a bit of banter over the table. You were getting tips. I was pouring pints
Yeah,
for
you're
people.
like, sorry guys, I smell of chip fat, but here's your roast dinner.
Yeah, there's a
Happy
massive thumb
Sunday.
smudge on your plate, but ignore that. Sorry, let me just get it off. It really was a bit, you know, trust me, hygiene was great, don't worry, for anyone.
Well, it's not a pub anymore, so
No, fair
do
enough.
that information what you will.
It got taken over by more interesting people. But yeah, in short, I really needed that, and it was very much a coming of age experience for me. So highly recommend. But yeah, so I had that in my life as well, and things were just starting to start coming together. And yeah, I think college again was. I still found it tough. I still felt like I was having to have this split personality, as you said earlier, because it kind of just gets escalated to another level when, you know, people are a bit older, like more drinking becomes more of a thing, partying, driving, like, you know, car, like you start to become an adult, and you start to become less comfortable with being a child.
But you're also so self-conscious. So self-conscious. I feel that age of 16, 17, 18 is when you are so aware
Mm.
of your appearance. You know, I think obviously you start becoming interested, have love interests younger than that. But I think that's when 16, 17, 18 kind of sex becomes a thing, and that adds a whole new level of self-consciousness.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
It's as soon as sex comes into the equation,
yeah,
it's like that's what everything's judged by.
yeah,
You know, it was a constant conversation. It was like, you know, if you haven't got a girlfriend, it's like, who are you after? What are you doing? And you're measured as a person not by who you are. It was by like what you're doing. And I feel
and
like,
who you're seeing.
yeah, and I feel like that, to be honest, is the phrase between like year 9 and college and the end of college is like you're judged on what you do, not who you are.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just, and it's, you know, it's total bullshit, right? Like
Yeah.
no one really works in that way when you're, you know, our age, 26.
But again, it's that kind of conforming to society and that self-policing that goes on, and you know, that forming of character. No, it's not how people operate as adults, but you wonder what we would operate like if we didn't have that kind of period of complete judgment, complete self-consciousness. It's almost like we said, like it's a coming of age, it's a rite of passage. You know, you don't. It's almost like you have to go through that. And granted, for some people, it is so much harder than others. Some people think back to their school days and they hate it. You know, and I think it is really hard for some people, but it's almost like you have to do it to become the person the adult that you are today. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, you know, on the positive side, it's character building. On the negative side,
Yeah,
it's
that's my mum's favourite saying, it's character
yeah,
building.
yeah. But also, you know, deep trauma. They're two sides of the coin, right? So, it's a really strange time.
You know, college was different for you because you found love, and it seems finding that love and having that first love was a really positive experience for you. And you know, you've said it, that it leaked into other parts of your life and you felt more confident. So that was a really positive experience.
Yeah, 100%. It was one of those things where I just had never felt it before as well. So I didn't understand what the dynamics were like, and you know, there was definitely some figuring out. You're still a 16-year-old child in that way, but it always kind of adhered to my like strengths as well in terms of, you know, one-on-one relationships and being in tune. I finally felt like the tools that I had within me were being used for the right purpose. Not saying I was perfect, but
No, when you're,
yeah,
of course, when you're 16, 17, 18,
yeah,
you're not.
you're figuring it out
Yeah.
still. But yeah, it was, yeah, I mean, I think meeting that person was the single most impactful thing that's happened in my life. It's, you know, big statement, but I've had a lot of time to
I think a
reflect,
fair
and
statement.
it's true.
Yeah.
And you know, it made me feel really positive again generally, and further helped me to set myself on the right track. Whereas I think for a long time there was a lot of, you know, cluelessness, a lot of, I guess, yeah, just like a lot of putting energy in different places that maybe wasn't very fulfilling. So that gave me something to focus on. It was massively beneficial.
And then, so looking beyond college and university now, that positivity that came from that relationship, how did that almost snowball into university and beyond?
Yeah. There was more positivity going into uni because I think for a lot of people it was a fresh start. You know, no one knew that I'd had ME, you know, and people will meet you when you're, yeah, I guess by that point 19 or 18 versus when, you know, you're 11, when you're very different people. So I really enjoyed my time at university overall, if I'm honest.
Where did you go?
I went to Bournemouth
What did you
uni,
study?
sports psychology. So, on brand.
Why?
I study sports psychology because I was trying to merge two of my favorite things, which was sport and psychology.
Great.
It is as simple as that. I was like, I wanted to become a sports psychologist because I knew that sort of tailored to my strengths. I love sport. I love like understanding why people do what they do. I love looking at athletes and going, why do they crumble in this moment? What's the difference between two players who are arguably the same, physicality and have the same skill set, but mentality differs so much. I didn't really know very much about psychology back then, but I knew it was something that I wanted to know more about. And for me, that's all you really need to know when you go into uni. It's what I felt was sort of guiding me. So I did that. But university was more for me. It was like kind of like challenging a lot of the boundaries that I put within myself as well. I was always a homeboy, as I said. I'd always struggled with, like when I was really young, even small things like staying over people's houses and stuff like that. I don't know why, it just felt scary. It felt new. But, I was now like moving away from home for the first time ever, which is scary.
To Bournemouth.
A whole 86 miles away. And, like it was weird things like having to do your own washing, do your own laundry, take care of yourself, do your shop. And I was always quite good at home, like I'd cook meals and stuff like that. But my mum might disagree with me there. But
you were always a very tidy kid.
Yeah, I feel like it was respectful, and that was a big thing in my family, was respect, and you don't fuck around. So essentially went to uni, and it was also that side that really helped in terms of you're just forced to grow up. You're forced to do things on your own, and that definitely transitioned into lots of other things, just seeing the world from more of a adult point of view, I guess, developing the relationships I had at that time as well. And out of respect, there are some things that I don't want to speak about around that time, because what did happen is that it did put a strain on certain elements of my life being in uni, and there are definitely times where I'm not really proud of the way that I've acted. But yeah, all I can say to that is I've reflected on it and understand that the wrongs and the rights in that point. So
yeah, there's certainly and with that, like you said, not getting into the details, but there's certainly at university that attention. You've got that teenager, as we spoke about, that kind of hormonal split personality, just Tasmanian devil going around in your brain. So that's kind of like pulling you back, but then adulthood is pushing you forward, because you're now living on your own. You're now you're becoming self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got these like forces acting on you, and so you are going to do stupid things. You are gonna there's going to be a lot of tension in that 3 years.
I think it's all about priorities as well. And I think at university, I'd struggled, I guess, with the social aspect previously to that. And I went and met people that were, like super open, and, like I was part of the tennis team as well. And, that camaraderie and the competition, and you used to drive to, all around the country on Wednesdays and go and play tennis with, all your mates in the car, and they'd be cheering you on. You play doubles with people. Like, it was that like bondedness and that spirit. It was like I found a tribe again, and I think that was really strong. But unfortunately, it just took over. It was filling a pretty deep bedded hole, possibly. And like looking back on it now, I'm still very fortunate for that, don't get me wrong. And I met some amazing people, and had so much fun, particularly on those Wednesdays in the cars when we were all singing to shit music, and driving up to Bristol or something like that. Like, it was great fun. And then I was captain in third year, and I had to I don't know, it was just amazing. I was so fortunate for that, and it's definitely given me so much confidence moving forward today. But that doesn't come without consequences, and as I say, looking back on it, I can only reflect on the things that I can do with hindsight. But yeah, it was. I still see it as, you know, an important factor in my life, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you said finding your tribe. I think that's such an important thing at uni. Uni for a lot of people can be incredibly alienating because I think, like you were able to kind of start afresh. No one really knew you. You can just be, and you have more confidence because you're that bit older to be kind of authentically yourself. And you fell into a group. You love tennis, you love sport, you found people that love the same things, and you really got along. But, you know, would you have any advice for people who are at uni or going into uni who might be terrified that it's not as fortunate for them? Because I know people that have gone to uni and they haven't found their people, and then you're suddenly in this big city completely alone. It can be isolating.
Yeah, definitely.
Would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I'm not really that close to people that I went to uni with. So what I mean by that is I don't see a lot of them. There are some people I still keep in contact with, but the people that I arguably saw the most, we've lost touch. And that somewhat makes me sad, but also it makes me realize that some people can be so positive for you at certain points in your life. But, you know, sometimes it's just not meant to be. Sometimes those friends are there to give you something in the moment. And it's okay if, you know, you don't keep in touch. So I think sometimes, to answer your question, what people do is they go to uni and they say, I'm going to meet my best friend for life. Or they put that standard upon themselves, that set that expectation. And then they never ultimately meet it because it's so high and it's so hard to say, I'm going to meet my best mate. And some people do. Loads of people do. It's, you know, probably the biggest pool of people you're going to be exposed to who are all doing the same thing as you.
Yeah, you're very like-minded.
Yeah. So my advice would be, as cliche as it is, whoever you think you are at that moment, be it. And the right people will be gravitated towards you. I think people can get stuck because they've had a certain experience at school or whatever it is, and then they actually use university as a chance to redevelop themselves, or like create this new identity that they believe people are going to actually like. Whereas, as I said earlier, that builds up the wall. People can tell when you're not being genuine with them, and, you know, therefore you're never going to make lasting friendships or relationships because you've built this massive wall up, because you're not portraying someone that you actually are. And, you know, I'm not like singing from my high horse here, but I would argue I went to uni and I just continued being the person I thought I was. And in some ways that was good, some ways that was bad, but that was who I was. Like I never changed. I don't think I went to uni actively thinking, right, I'm going to be like, or pretend like I'm the most popular person in school, you know, or anything like that. I just went to uni and I was like, okay, I kind of know what I like in people. I kind of know what I don't. I know roughly where my boundaries are. So I'm just going to roll through. I love tennis. I love psychology. I'll be friends with, you know, like whoever I get on with kind of thing, not whoever's the most popular. And that, you know, like reap benefits for me. But ultimately, it also wasn't about me, I guess, needing to fill any holes at uni. It was just like I wanted something new. I just wanted a fresh start. And yeah, it was very interesting. As soon as I went to uni and I came back for that first summer, I also felt a different connection with, you know, all of my other friends as well. Something just clicked, and it was like, I think everyone needed just a bit of time and space to like relax and to chill out and to be away from each other. And then that first summer we all came back and we did some really nice things, like we'd all go to the pub together and stuff like that. And like, it just felt like a different page. And, you know, it's really interesting that happens because I think people grow up at uni.
Yes. And I think when you grow up and you normally stay within your circle at school, you know, whoever you went to school with, whoever you went to college with, you normally stay within those circles. And so those people are the center of your universe. Whereas when you go to uni, there are people coming in from all parts of the country. I mean, even different countries. And so your universe is expanded so much. And then you make connections, if you're fortunate enough to make connections with other people that you would never have met unless you'd gone to uni. And they bring a whole new perspective on things. And so when you do go back to your friends, like obviously your school friends, obviously there's that way and, you know, you have that what's the word?
You've got like a way marker almost. It's like
What?
it's a way marker, meaning like you can sorry, you can like plot markers, and the more markers you have, the more you like understand things. So I feel like when you go to uni, it like plots all these different points in like a realm that you didn't know that was previously unexplored, and then it means that you can kind of then understand like, oh, what's life from someone like, you know, who's from Norwich, or don't know why I said Norwich, but
very flat.
Yeah, very very flat. Essentially, you understand what people are like from different areas of the world, as you say, and like it's important. But as I say, it's funny because I didn't, you know, make those like best friends at uni, etc. But I love them all. Like,
but it gave you new perspective.
Yeah, 100%. But and yeah, I just was able to understand what life was like for people outside of my own little circle. And I feel like for anyone, that's always important.
Yeah, and I think it's important to preface here that where we grew up in Farnham, it's very, and I wanted to ask you this earlier, but it kind of, I bookmarked it, but where you grow up really defines who you are, obviously. And you know, where we grew up is quite a small town. It's very privileged. It's like living in a bubble.
Yeah. 100%.
And so, you know, and very, you and I are both very aware of that privilege and what it gave us. And it's a very safe town, to live in, but it's university and branching out. It's like you burst that bubble and you see that, you know, not everywhere in the country is like Farnham.
Yeah.
But it gives you this it suddenly turns your world into colour.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, there's so much more out there. And I mean, I really had that experience. I think what you're saying is exactly the same. You don't necessarily make best friends, but my God, they gave you a new perspective on how it was like for someone living in Norwich.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, and
it definitely exposes you to, yeah, you're right, not just different characters, but also like different ways of life. You're right, you know, this privilege of living in a nice town, you know, suburbia, etc. Like you meet people who are from, you know, like poorer areas in central big cities, etc., who have had completely different, you know, paths to you, and you're like, fuck, okay, you know, maybe I shouldn't have been complaining about this, or maybe people actually have it way harder than I think it is. And you know, it's those types of that type of exposure that helps you to be a bit more grounded and a bit more humble, I think. And
absolutely, it's a
vital.
humbling experience,
and
for sure.
I tell you what university did for me as well is I went off for a placement year. So I did a year working in at England Hockey, actually. And my God, it was like the best year of my life, I swear. It was so good. Just in all respects, I think I was able to be even more of an adult then, because I was commuting like an hour and a half to work, an hour and a half from work every day. And, you know, I was driving there, driving home. I had to, you know, put my nice shirts on and stuff. I had to like get my life together. And even though I was living at home, it was like I was able to know what it felt like to, be like this adult that I kind of wasn't at that age. I was like 21, 22. But, you know, I had responsibility. I had things to do. I was blessed with an incredible manager called Sally, who really like set the benchmark for me of what a good manager is. And I, you know, was also trusted with a lot of things there. I filmed like a promotional video for their like player pathway, which is sort of like the under like 13s to 18s academy, and it was awesome. And by the way, like I knew absolutely nothing about hockey, nothing. I'd never played it, never held a hockey stick. Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I know we're from Surrey, but come on, like it was always tennis for me. You know, that was always my sport. So I was kind of out of my depth and I had no idea what was going on. But you know, I went in as an intern there, and it was just it was so good in so many ways. I really understood the business world and the pressures that, you know, NGBs, like governing bodies, feel, budget restrictions, etc. And
Yeah.
I personally,
Rewind. NGBs.
National governing bodies.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Acronyms.
Yeah. So I'm
banned.
terrible at that. So so it was really, really interesting, and I kind of attribute that as to why I felt so confident going into work after uni as well, because I kind of been there, done that for a year. I'd worked as part of a team. I was, you know, I had my own roles, my responsibilities, and I was fortunate enough to be in like conversations about, you know, I guess like budgets and finance and stuff like that. So I was just kind of like, I went there and I was like, right, I'm a sponge, just throw me wherever you want me because I want to learn. And like, it was so amazing. So yeah, definitely I'd recommend doing a placement year if you can.
Was your placement paid?
Not for 9 months.
Not for 9 months?
Yeah, so I did it unpaid for 9 months. And
did they pay your travel?
Yes. So essentially expenses were covered, but I went to them and I said, take me if you can cover expenses, etc. And you know, I think I was still working outside of that at the time as well to like fund just like the basics, you know. But I was living at home, my overheads were super low and they covered travel, so I just needed enough to like, you know, do like fun stuff on the weekends.
And that's quite a fortunate position that you had. I mean, paid internships, I mean, there's a whole thing about paid internships and not paid internships and placements and things like that, because, you know, it's free work what you're doing for them. Obviously you're building that experience, but why is there that expectation that a person should work for free to build up their career? So I think, what would be your advice for someone who wants to build up their career whilst they're at uni, but also cannot afford to do 9 months unpaid work?
I know I'm going to sound like an old dad here, but the world is very different now, you know, even 5 years later. And it all depends what sector you're in, right? If it's, you know, marketing or something like that, then I mean, God, you know, try and start your own business, do your own side hustle or something like that. Like, I know when you're 21, you know, like it's tricky, but at the end of the day, like we've never had so many tools within us to try and do something a little different. You know, most people have an iPhone, most people have access to social media or something like that. So, you know, you have the tools and the platform to try and promote something that you're doing. Whereas, you know, even at uni, I don't remember social media being that much of a thing. I don't remember like, you know, the influencer marketing game, for example, being very strong or that even existing.
Yeah, I mean, TikTok wasn't around.
No, I think people were still talking on Snapchat, and that was the main form of social media, obviously.
Yeah, Snapchat was big.
Yeah, and, you know, so I say that cautiously because I think the actual answer to your question is it's fucking difficult.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have any sort of, you know, like financial support, or, you know, the company isn't open to ultimately paying you. Because when a company says we're not going to pay you and that's it, no expenses, no nothing, they're essentially limiting their pool to the types of people that they want working there. Because someone who, you know, whose family can't support them for a year, which is the majority, like my family couldn't do it, you know. So it was like, that's the problem, is that they're limiting the pool. So they need to be really cautious about that. And I think unpaid is very different to, low pay. Like if you can live at home, for example, if you're fortunate enough to, and you get paid £600-700 a month, like, okay, like you could probably do that, right? Like it's doable,
Yeah.
just about. You need to be able to cover like the basics. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that were being advertised weren't being paid at all. And, that like,
I think it's irresponsible of universities to even allow that, in a way. Because you do get paid placements at university. And yeah, like you said, from when we were at uni to now, a lot has moved on around that area in particular. I remember seeing like a lot of in the media about unpaid internships and the kind of morality and ethics behind that.
It was interesting at England Hockey because I worked unpaid for 9 months, but then I was quite handy with like a camera and I could edit and stuff like that. And I essentially like proposed that we did these promotional videos for their pathway, as I mentioned. And the deal was that they would have paid me, but within a national governing body, you get a budget and finance for a year, and that all gets organised for the next 2 years kind of thing, because it's lottery funded. So me kind of like rocking up and going, oh, can you add another employee onto your your like paychecks, etc. It wasn't really gonna fly. Like they literally didn't have budget for it because it wasn't forecasted. So then I said, can we do these promotional videos? And they said yes. And I was essentially like a contractor at that point. So then I did get paid within that period because I was doing very specific work for them. And I think, we just had a conversation about this, but it's if you're the primary beneficiary of the work that you do as an intern, then you need to be paid. Also, you don't need to be paid. So, whereas on the contrary, because I was
whether you should be paid is another thing.
Well, yeah,
but
true.
You don't have to be legally,
from a legal standpoint. But when you should be paid and when it's legal to be paid is when you're doing work directly for the company that benefits the company. So in those last 3 months, it was definitely more structured. I was coming to work, I was doing, the same sort of thing every day. I had one task, one role, and it was for the benefit, obviously, of me as well, but it was for the benefit of the company, their assets they could use for the rest of their time. So really cool experience, I have to say, and definitely kick-started my career and, sort of developed that, I guess, like work hat that I hadn't experienced before.
Okay, so let's go into your career now. So you've done the placement, you've graduated university. Where do you go? What do you do?
I actually went traveling for a bit, and but swiftly after that, as soon as I came back, actually COVID hit, which I'm not going to go into because no one wants to relive that situation. But long and the short of it, I came home. There were absolutely no jobs around. I did a bit of freelance videography for a few different people for a while just to tip me over, so I had some money. But after that, I then was looking for jobs online. I didn't really know what I wanted to do because I'd quickly realised within sports psychology that I was looking at probably about 7 years of education in total, at least 60k down the drain in terms of like further tuition fees, but also paying for qualifications. And then I knew sports psychologists who were really struggling to find work because it's so limited in terms of the pool that you can work with. So that just put me off that profession entirely. But interestingly, it's still something I'd love to explore, but who knows? It's just felt like too much of a cost at that time. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I wanted to be part of a young company somewhere, a company that was trying to, I guess, like challenge the status quo a little bit, somewhere where there's a great culture that I could learn from. And, similar to England Hockey in a way, everyone was bounded by the same values of, I want to make sure that this, England Hockey team or the GB team are going to succeed. And then below that, it was, I want to make sure that, you know, like young players are given opportunities to shine. So everyone was bounded by the same values. And I felt that, and that integrates into the culture, you know, it gives everyone a purpose to turn up to work every day. And I knew that's what I wanted again. It was a feeling I wanted to find. Very hard to put that into LinkedIn and search for that, but a bit of divine intervention happened where I applied for like an influencer marketing company. At the time, didn't know much about it, but just from their like value proposition on their website, looking at I guess like their general approach as a company, they're a startup. I just like, there was something about it that just like felt right. And I applied for the job, didn't hear back for like a week, I don't think. So I just decided to call the number that was on their website. And it turns out that it was the head of HR's mobile number direct, because they're a young company, right? They don't have like a HR department. And she was like, hello. And I was like, hi. And it was like literally a mobile number. And I was like, oh, I was just wondering whether there's like any progress on my application. My name's blah, blah, blah. She was like, oh, nice. And I was just like really polite to her on the phone. And I later found out that the only reason I got a first interview, because I didn't have any marketing experience, was because I spoke to her on the phone and she went, oh, well, he's bothered to call and chase it. So I'm going to give this person a chance. And I had the first interview, and it was with Claudia at the time, who's still head of HR at the company. And it just clicked. Like the first thing I said was, well, the first thing she asked was, why do you want to work here? And what I'd recently discovered, and what I mentioned earlier, is all I care about is the why. I just care about the why and the things, always look for the deeper meaning. And one of Taylorfi's values was like always looking for the deeper meaning. So I saw that connection and I was like, cool, that's what I'm going to lead with. And I said that to her, and her eyes literally just went like this. And she was like, I've just done a workshop on the why. And it was just like, you know, yeah, divine intervention, things aligned, went through the rest of the interview process. And, you know, ultimately got a job as a CSA, which was like the lowest sort of like position at the company. Across the next 2.5 years, worked my way up. So I'm now a manager. And yeah, that was sort of what happened to me.
Okay. I'm going to rewind
Sure.
straight back, because
Yeah.
there's so many things that you touched on there that are interesting. First of all, great piece of advice in terms of applying for something. One of my very good friends worked in recruitment, and she said it's always good to kind of, if you're applying on LinkedIn, see who the hiring manager is, connect with them on LinkedIn, or if there's a number, don't be afraid to call. It is terrifying, obviously, cold calling someone, but it's what got you the interview. And again, other stories that I've heard from people I know, when they've been in the interview and they've asked them, oh, so what inspires you? And then he turned around and said to them, well, he said his answer and then said, what inspires you? And they said that's what made him stick in their mind. So it's just about putting yourself out there. You might not have the experience, and I think that's something that I'm going to ask you about in a sec, but you might not have the experience, but you
show what you're made of.
Yeah. You put your personality out there.
Yeah.
Which is what sticks. So I think, yeah. What was it like being in an interview for something you had no experience in?
I guess I was fortunate because the role that I was going into was quite clearly advertised for someone who had little experience in marketing. But I knew that I had a job in terms of how do I translate the experience that I have got to suit the requirement of the role. And I feel like, honestly, almost everyone can do that for every role. Maybe not so much, for if you're like a data
being
analyst.
A doctor.
Yeah. There are definitely exceptions to the rule, but I'd say roles and industries that require a widespread set of skills, like marketing or PR or something like that.
What's it called? That it's like transferable skills. Yeah,
transferable skills. I knew, I'd done video editing. I'd actually like edited some content for an influencer previously to that. So I kind of like roughly understood what the process looked like. And
you consume
yeah, and
influencers' content as a consumer.
Exactly. So that's why I decided to start with philosophy instead of start with what my experience was, because I kind of didn't have a choice. But it was somewhat a tactical move. But actually, looking back on it, it was kind of happenstance. It just happened. Again, a week before my interview, one of my friends just randomly said to me, "You really seem like the type of person that cares about the why." And I knew it, but I never put it in such an effective sentence. And I was like, God, I'm going to use that. So I used it. And like, I have to say,
I'm going to put that in my notes.
Yeah. I have to say, if I am going to give advice, and I've interviewed quite a lot of people now, if someone said that to me and started with something in terms of a broad perspective on their life, it says so much more than just saying what you've done. If you say, I believe in this, like I'm applying to this company because I believe in this, because this is what I stand for. And from my current, estimations of what you do, it looks like you would do the same thing.
That's really good advice. To go, rather than to go into an interview, what you're saying is, rather than go interview and they say, why do you want this job? To kind of go, oh yeah, well, company X is great. You guys have been around since this day and I really love the work that you do. But to go in and say, well, my values are here and I have looked and it seems like your values are here and I really align myself with that. And I think that's also such a generational thing. There's a real shift between maybe our parents' generation that worked for companies for their status and the money you could earn. Whereas now they're saying that our generation and younger generations really care about the why, really care about the values. It's not so much about the money. It's about what are you doing as a company, and whether that aligns with what I want to do. And I think you going in there and saying our values aligned is exactly that.
Yeah. And particularly for those entry-level roles is when it's really important, because if you're looking at someone's experience and you're 21, realistically, what have you been meant to do up until that age from a work perspective? Like look at my CV. Was working at a pub for 3 years really going to help me, like from a on paper standpoint, work in marketing? No. Even England hockey, doing sports psychology or, shadowing a psychologist or whatever, would it obviously have transferable skills across to influencer marketing? No. What does have transferable skills is saying, well, what I learned from that is the value of how teams work together, is the stresses that departments have between each other, that everyone has different goals. So what I care about is trying to do all I can to make that process easier for other people. It's like you summate all of those learnings into a phrase or a philosophy or a statement, and then you say it in an interview, and people are like, oh, I get it. Because they don't need to know that you worked at the pub. They just need to know what you learned from it.
Amen.
Yeah. So, I guess in short, it massively helps.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, okay. So you get the job, you start working, and then, so what year was that?
Gosh, I think that was October 2020.
Okay, October 2020. We're now in July 2023. So that's just over two and a half years.
Yeah, over 2.5 years.
Where you are now, describe that to me. What is your role? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I manage a team. So I have 4 fantastic colleagues. And that happened as of January. So I was kind of managing a few people before that, but officially it happened last January. And my current role is to essentially manage campaigns from start to finish. So I guess that's our team's role more specifically. And I have one client, and basically they're a major sort of like freelancer network. And essentially our role is to produce campaigns for them depending on like the content strategy throughout the year, which is something we work on with them directly. But also we have a strategy team, they're awesome. So they come in and help us decide what the content format looks like, what the messaging is, etc. And I'm very fortunate because the client's like really dynamic, and we do things around cultural moments. So we've done stuff for like Black History Month, for example, Women's History Month. We've just done a Pride activation as well. So really cool. It's, we get to sort of like think about new ideas all the time, which is, very
Cultural
fortunate.
moments is such advertising speak. It's like you wouldn't really hear that phrase used if you didn't work in advertising.
Very true. My advertising friends over there will understand. But and ultimately within my role, it's really just to help oversee the efficiency and the process of running those campaigns, in addition obviously to personal development from everyone within my team. And to be honest, like the third role, but it's sort of like maybe less so in the job description, is just trying to make sure that everyone develops in their own individual way, whether that's within work or outside of work.
Yeah. And so, but since October 2020 to, did you say January 2023?
2023.
You manage 4 people. You're 26 years old. You manage a team of 4 in a startup company, a marketing startup. That's quite something.
Yeah, it's been an interesting time. I think, up and before January, before I was officially a manager, there was a lot of, like, it's not even like, yes, there were long days, etc. But it was also I just had such a clear goal, and I was so bought into the company. Our values really did align, and I really did believe in where the company was going. And I think that is such a fuel to work really smart and really hard for a prolonged duration of time. And there was definitely some fortune in that. I'll hold my hands up. Like, I had an incredible mentor called Lorna. She was my manager, gave me the space to move and flex, and she's actually going to feature on a podcast soon. So
tune in for that one, guys.
Yeah, I know. I think that's actually our next
Sneaky
one.
plug.
So you'll hear all about that. Learned so much from her. Really, really valued that friendship. And so I had that as part of the sort of growth journey. I was also, I was provided our client, I think it was about a year and a half ago, maybe nearly 2 years ago. And at the time they weren't, like super successful in terms of within our company. They were quite a new client. The relationship was a little bit torn. But then I kind of got that as my first, like, right, Chris, like, you're going to lead this, like, you're going to manage the situation. And then together with the rest of the team, helped build that relationship up until what it is now, which is, a far cry from what it was when we initially got it. And that experience alone gave me massive purpose, responsibility, value, accountability, all of those things that you need at work in order to thrive. So listen, if I hadn't been handed that and I was given a more established client where they're not open to change, etc., maybe my path would have been different. But ultimately you're given the cards that that you're dealt with. And I also, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I do believe that you need to be ready for whatever is about to hit you or may not hit you. So
can you ever be ready for something like that?
Yeah, I think within the business context, you never know what's around the corner. I had no idea fibre was going to be given to me, but before that, I wanted to make sure that I was doing my absolute best in case something like that did come on the cards, and sometimes your current situation isn't always reflective of where you want to be. But something I was actually talking to Luca about on one of our last podcasts was this idea that you almost have to kind of like fake it until you make it. And what I mean by that is I needed to be the type of person or act like the type of person that was ready to hold an account of that size or ready to manage people. I had no experience in managing people, but I needed to be the type of person where people thought, yeah, he could.
Yeah, I've had that advice before, is that if you're after something at work and, start taking on those responsibilities already, or start, look at those additional responsibilities or that role, and start, having conversations with people about how do I get there, but also start, actually playing out that role. Do as much of that role that you can do. Obviously, don't start working stupid hours and taking on extra work, but maybe dip your toe in, and like you said, you wanted to be that person that was ready for that account. So how did you become that person that was ready for a big account, was ready for a big client? What did you do? Did you communicate with your colleagues who were already managing big accounts and absorbing work? Did you have conversations with your mentor about handling bigger clients? How did that look?
I think the main thing was I kind of said yes to a lot of things. So, I definitely said yes to things, even though I maybe didn't want to do them. And so that was one thing. But arguably the single biggest thing for me was being the type of person that you want to work with. So, everyone's themselves. And I think there's definitely value in some people being quite driven and selfish at times, because you actually need those individuals to help businesses function.
Oh yeah, in
sometimes.
A sales team, you need those folks.
Exactly. If everyone's like, oh well, I'll do whatever, that doesn't help anyone sometimes. But the person that I was that one of my objectives when I came to work is that I wanted people to enjoy working with me, and I'd definitely, I'd counter, if I didn't believe in something, I'd stand up for myself when I didn't. But ultimately, I wanted to, show that I cared about not just the work, but the people who are doing the work as well. And, I say all the time, but so much of life is about perception and how people perceive you. And if you're perceived as someone who, yes, can take a challenge, yes, can cope with stress, etc., but also someone who's perceived to be open to new ideas, to someone, that I guess, would, I think that's it, be open to new ideas, then you're naturally going to open up a lot more conversation. Whereas if you're someone that's difficult to work with, that pushes back on everything, that lets her ego get in the way of, their sort of general action all the time, then you're not going to be the type of person that people want to reward.
Yeah.
So it's kind of self-fulfilling, and there's lots of elements to it. There's luck, there's, divine intervention, but there's also some things that you can control. And I think it's just about exploring what scenario you're in, what your situation you're in, and understanding what, you have control over and what you don't.
Yeah, I think a core piece of advice is make it impossible for them not to reward you. Make it really hard. Obviously there are going to be shit days. There are going to be days when you're working and you're just like, oh my God. But, in general, I think what you're saying is that make it really difficult for your company not to go, this person is brilliant. We see them in the future of our company, and for them to stay, we need to reward them. And that is just being open, like you said, open, being a people person. Yeah. And being collaborative and being empathetic. This is the thing that I say all the time at work is, that is, empathy is such a huge thing in the workplace.
Yeah.
Such a huge thing.
It really is. And I think you don't always have to be the loudest voice, and you don't have to be outgoing. You don't have to go to socials, and like be the party person. But what you need to have is, some defining qualities about yourself. And whatever those defining qualities are for you, use them. Make it a point to demonstrate them. Because in fact, I listen back to what I've just said, and I think it's easy for some people to think, oh, well, maybe those people who are just kind of like naturally confident and they'll just roll into anything and they'll do any presentation, or, you know, like they'll say yes to anything, even if it's scary. It's like, I wasn't one of those people. Like, I was terrified of presenting, terrified. I still am. I still hate it. And I'm still trying to get over it, right? There were loads of things I was nervous to do. And yes, naturally, one of I'd say my skills is being personable, but I knew that was my skill, so I capitalized on it. And I don't believe that there's any one way to get success in like life or even in work, but it's just about understanding what you're good at and making the most of it. So that's my advice, is whatever that is, then run with it.
And then, okay, so understanding what you're good at, you know, figuring out those defining qualities, that's quite hard. That is quite hard to be that self-reflective and go, okay, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, you know. What would be your advice to someone, you know, who's, you know, listening and thinking, I don't know what I'm good at. Like, I just do me and I just do what I want to do, and that seems to work or doesn't work, and I need to figure out what am I good at on a kind of skill base. How do you?
So two things. I think one, you need to open up those internal channels of review. So you need to be somewhat self-aware about what you don't like and what you do like. How you do that is just by creating a time and a space to do so. You know, like, it could be like journaling or writing, but just think about past times where you felt like you're in flow, like where you felt like the world is in the palm of your hand, you can do whatever you want. What was it that characterized that situation? Who knows? I don't know. I can't put myself in that position, but that's number one.
I think as well, to add to that, is seeking feedback from your friends and also your colleagues. If you're not sure what you're great at, generally people who you work with or people who you spend a lot of time with do know what you're good at. And sometimes when you have conversations with friends and they say, yeah, you're really good at X, Y, and Z, and you think, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. So I think when you're really stuck with, oh my God, I don't know how to verbalize it, or I wouldn't even know where to begin, I think starting from within and opening up those channels. And then I think you said creating the time and space for it, which you can elaborate on. But I think as well is, yeah, if you're really clueless, ask the people around you that love you, because they'll be honest.
Definitely. I think you've just highlighted an interesting point there. Naturally, I always go internally, but actually you're right. External feedback is vital, and from the right types of people as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The second point is, what are you gravitated towards naturally without anyone asking you? So what I mean by that is, outside of work, maybe even outside of your friends or socials, etc., when you're on your own, what you pull towards, what brings your attention, you know, up a level. And I think for me personally, what am I gravitated towards? Like, what am I doing right now? I'm talking to you, having a conversation, because building a podcast is something that I truly believe is part of me and something that I love doing without anyone asking me to do it. So that's one example of like how I feel gravitated towards having one-on-one conversations with people that are probably on a deeper level than just, you know, how's your day, what you up to. I'm gravitated towards that. That's something that I've chosen to do solely because of me. And so I think understanding what those things are will also help you in terms of what your strengths are, because the things you're gravitated towards sometimes will help you realize, oh, okay, well, I'm doing this because I feel like I'm good at it, or I feel like I'm in the flow. There's also a counter argument to that, which says you should also do things that are outside your comfort zone, because, you know, it will develop you as a more sort of like well-rounded, holistic person. But, you know, it's sometimes a bit of both.
Yeah, you don't have to do things that scare you every single day. you know, if you don't like presenting, don't force yourself to do presentations every single day. Well, I mean, you could, and you'd probably get quite used to it, and you
True.
wouldn't find it scary at all.
You have to challenge your boundaries somewhat to realize that
Growth.
they're not actually boundaries. I often talk about, you know, to make things make you realize that that challenge is not a mountain, it's a molehill, because you can challenge it and you can do it.
I think what we've seen is really your journey from the beginning right up until now. And also I think you've had like lots of pivotal moments within there that have put you on this path and that path. But I think what would be interesting to know is, A, what was your toughest age, or what was the toughest period within your life up until now? And then B, what advice would you tell yourself at that age? What would be your one piece of advice for yourself at that age? What would you like to tell them now?
Yeah. So ironically, I know I've had spoken at length about the things that happened when I was, 13 and so on, but ultimately those things were hard, but they were somewhat subconscious because I wasn't quite as self-aware. The hardest times have been, and time was specifically, I think, around sort of like November 2022. And that kind of extended from, to be honest, from November to, probably like March, April of this year. And it was mainly because two fairly pivotal things kind of like landed at the same time. And out of respect for both people, I'm not going to mention what it was, but essentially something happened with a close relationship that only really properly hit home, I think, at that point in time. And then something very devastating happened to my family. And I was heavily involved in quite a serious situation. So that was really tough. Two big support networks not being there. And I think it was the only real time, and it was the first time where I really, and I don't like throwing this word around, but I'd say depressed. I was just, every day was just a struggle. I found no enjoyment in the things that I used to enjoy. Getting up in the morning was hard, and ultimately I just saw so many barriers in front of me, so many hurdles, so many mountains to climb. And, I think for a period in time, I just gave up. I just couldn't even begin to think how me feeling in this like weak position that I am could go and, to use the same term, climb that mountain. And, it was just impossible. It felt impossible. And so I think leading to that, the one piece of advice that I'd give to myself at that time would be, the only thing that helped me through that was by challenging the hurdles that I thought I had in front of me. So making those little steps, whether that was, I don't know, me not feeling very confident. It's like, okay, well, do a tiny thing that's going to make you feel good, like challenge your belief. Or if it was presenting, for example, to use that analogy, it'd be just present like one slide in a call, or do like one thing, say yes to do one thing that's going to be out your comfort zone. That proves to yourself that you can do it, right? And it challenges that negative belief in your mind that you can't. And it was that negativity in my mind that I found really hard to shift. So yeah, the one piece of advice is align on the things that you find difficult, and then do one thing to try and challenge that, and then build from it on the next time. And then hopefully then you can, start bringing yourself out of it.
I really like that. It's baby steps. And, there's a saying, it's like, try not to boil the ocean, just take one thing at a time. So yeah, thank you. Chris, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and I've loved sitting in the interview chair. It's a lot nicer than probably being interviewed.
Yeah. It feels strange being on this side of it.
But yeah, thank you. And I've known you for a really long time, but I feel like I've learned more about you as well. And I think it'll be really nice for people who are tuning in that learning about you. And I think the whole purpose of this was to put yourself in the spotlight, as you expect or ask other people to do. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. Be kind, everyone. Thanks, Alice.
Thanks.